Hello. Hello. How's it going? Going good? It's going alright here. I just thought I filmed this video, but it turns out I didn't. So now I'm refilming it. That's how it goes. So if I cough a little bit more than usual, because my voice is not used to speaking so much, and I do need a bit more of a water drink. And I look super sweaty because I'm out here. Although it's cloudy, it's still quite hot outside. But here we're going. We're going take two. Take two is going to be better than take one. Anyway. Please forgive me if I sound a bit disheveled. Well, I won't. Not too much. Don't worry. Today, I'd like to talk about Alexander Pushkin's The Captain's Daughter. Not the Queen of Spades, but the other stories. And one of those other stories being The Captain's Daughter. Now, Alexander Pushkin, he is the big daddy, the big kahuna of Russian literature. Even when he was living, he was regarded as the greatest ever Russian poet. And as centuries have passed, his name has only been more so cemented in the Russian literary tradition. He's spoken to as the father of Russian literature. Now, I have not read The Captain's Daughter until now, but I have read The Queen of Spades and Eugene Onegin. Eugene Onegin is described by many as his masterpiece, and quite great it is. It's a poem it's a narrative poem, which has a very interesting rhyme scheme, which is, not only is it, are there eight lines in the pretty much all the stanzas, but the rhyme scheme is sort of so intricate and interesting. I don't even want to go into it too much, because I don't really know it, but I know it is quite interesting and intricate. I recall that. Now, Alexander Pushkin, he came from a pretty high-class family in Russia. I think most of his family, at least his father, was in the military, I believe. And he seemed always destined for not a life in the military. I don't think he was in the military at all himself, but always destined for a life of the arts. Ever since he was young, it was identified how much of a genius he was. Interestingly enough, Alexander Pushkin, this is something I recently discovered, Alexander Pushkin also had African heritage. Whoa! He was 1/8 African. 1/8 black. His great-grandfather was a black man, I think from Ethiopia, who had been kidnapped by, Russians or something like that. Maybe stolen to slavery. I can't really remember the story exactly, but he had been kidnapped by Russians, and he ended up rising into, I don't think he was sold into slavery, but he grew up in the court, in a sort of aristocratic court, and he ended up becoming a very prominent general. So he is 1/8 black. Not that this is a huge deal, and not that if we were to see Pushkin in his time, and I'm sure if the people saw Pushkin in their time, they didn't really recognize that, because Russians are kind of a mix of everything. I shouldn't say they're a mix of everything, but, they have people from all over. It's such a sprawling country. They can't help but have, all kinds of different looking people there. But still, I find that an interesting point, and I wanted to mention it. Let me just make sure this is still filming. Yeah, you're filming, boy. You're filming. I just found that an interesting point to make, because I wonder how it seeps into his work. I wonder how he commented about it, whether he did comment about it, whether he embraced it or not. And as far as we're concerned, in the United States, and I might go as far as to say Europe, definitely in the United States during the Plessy versus Ferguson eras, up until the Civil Rights era, perhaps even until today, if you are 1/8 black, something like that, you're not quite white. You're not quite white. Not to make this into a super political thing, but you're not quite white. It's definitely up until the Civil Rights era. All right, enough of that. Enough of that talking about white and black. Alexander Pushkin. Phenomenal writer, poet, ends up dying in a duel in his late 30s. He's quite young. And there was a lot of uproar. And like national demonstrations, we can say, national lamentations. A lot of people were sad, but a lot of people also wondered whether his death was part of a conspiracy. A little conspiracy. He died in a duel with a Frenchman, a French aristocrat who was rumored to be having an affair with Pushkin's wife. And Pushkin, being the bellicose, the argumentative and volcanic person that he was, challenged the man to a duel. Some people wonder whether there was some sort of intrigue behind the scenes that attempted to get Pushkin into this duel. Even to this day, people talk about that. Well, that's enough about Pushkin for Pushkin the man as much. And we're going to go right into the work, The Captain's Daughter, which is a novella that he wrote. It's written as the novel-length masterpiece, but to me, it's a novella. It's 100 pages, so to me, it's a novella. My only way of classifying novel or novella is really the length. And 100 pages isn't quite a novel. It's approaching it, but it's not quite. Now, what is The Captain's Daughter about? It's about this young man, Pyotr Andreevich, whose father is a prominent army officer who enlists his son in the army. He's very eager to enlist his son in the army, and Pyotr Andreevich gets enlisted in the army. He ends up going to a fort in sort of the middle of nowhere in Russia. I'm not exactly sure where it is geographically, but it's called the Beligorsk Fort. Please forgive me for my pronunciation. But that fort, he goes to a sort of fort in the middle of nowhere. It's very dreary, depressing. Along with him is his servant, Savlich, and the dynamic between Andreevich and Savlich, I quite like that dynamic. The servant who sort of always wants Andreevich to be safe, not engage in reckless behaviors, be frugal with his money, whereas Andreevich, especially in the early part of the story, demonstrates a lot of reckless behaviors. For example, he gambles a lot of money naively. He's not a gambling man. That doesn't become a significant theme throughout the novella, but at the beginning, to sort of demonstrate his naivete, and his sort of, let's say, fresh, what do we say it? Springbok, fresh, his sort of young youth and recklessness, he gambles away some money with other army officers. But one of the themes, before I talk about the themes, I'll continue with a brief summary of what happens at the beginning of the novella. So he goes to this dreary fort, and there's not much happening there. It's boring. But one thing, but that changes. That would make for a very boring story. That changes. He falls in love. Seemingly he sees the captain's daughter, the captain of the fort, the officer that he is under, and he takes a liking for his daughter. And that is a important element of the story. Obviously, the story being called The Captain's Daughter. And he also meets a rival at the fort. There's a rival, a Frenchman. I don't want to pronounce his name because it's a difficult name to pronounce. Excuse me. But he meets a Frenchman there who is also his rival. And it's sort of his rival in love, too. The Russians love being rivals with the French. Being rivals with the Europeans, but especially being rivals with the French. And that's why, as I mentioned in my War and Peace video, there's always a tension between Russians and Europeans. Very often, I should say. There is often a tension between Russians and Europeans. So, that is pretty much the first 1/4 of the novella, is that. But what happens, now we're getting into a bit more spoilers. On his way, before arriving at the fort, he meets a man who seems quite inconsequential. He seemed very inconsequential at the time. But this man helped guide Andreich and his servant through a blizzard, through a snowstorm. He very well may have saved their lives, and he helped guide them through this blizzard. And to repay him, Andreich gave him some money and gave him a very nice wool jacket. Even amongst the protests of his servant, Savlej didn't want Andreich to give things away because he wanted Andreich to remain frugal and, didn't want to do that. Andreich gave these things away. Now, later on in the story, this character, this guide, reappears. And he reappears as a rebel leader, Pugachev. A rebel outlaw who claims to be, I believe, the nephew of the ruling Tsarina at the time, Catherine the Great. Catherine II. And I forget the name of the person, the historical figure that Pugachev is claiming to be, but I think it's Pyotr Fyodorich or something like that. But I believe it was the nephew of Catherine II, but I might be mistaken. But he was essentially an heir to the Russian Tsardom, but he was sort of quietly deposed of. He went missing. And like this always happens, when people go missing, pretenders arise. People who claim that they are the long-lost prince. And Pugachev is one of those. However, Pugachev and our main character, Andreich, recognize each other. And Pugachev recognizes and recalls the kindness that Andreich demonstrated for him in giving him money, in giving him that wool jacket And because of that, a dynamic occurs between Pugachev, this rebel leader now, this rebel pretender, and Andreich. A sort of uneasy dynamic occurs between them. This is a dynamic in which Pugachev recognizes this honor and this sort of inherent nobility that Andreich possesses. And he himself is lacking that. He's lacking this inherent nobility, this sort of blue blood, sophisticated aura which Andreich possesses, even at a young age. And because of that, Pugachev is constantly seemingly trying to court Andreich into his circle. He's trying to gain the approval of this young man. While Andreich is very often needing the help of Pugachev because, to not get in too depth in this story, to basically be with his excuse me, to basically be with his lover, the captain's daughter. Now, I've described a lot of this novella, but there's a lot that is gray that I have not described. And I'm going to just leave it at that for the most part, because I don't think that it's warranted for me to give a whole summary of this story. But essentially, the theme of honor, integrity, authenticity, and keeping your word, all of those very much related, are important themes in this novella and in Pushkin's broader work. Pushkin is very much a transition from romanticism, the romanticism of Byron, which Pushkin was heavily influenced by, towards realism. Now, realism, we can point out Tolstoy as being one of the essential realists. I'm sorry. I'm coming down. I'm not coming down, but I'm recovering from a cold as well. And speaking so long without being too fully hydrated. I think coffee might be making it worse. Without being too fully hydrated is a bit tough, but all out of water. No. But yeah, to say that Pushkin is a transition from romanticism to realism. Romanticism, which espouses the individual authenticity, breaking through against the world. And realism, which focuses a bit more on social dynamics, which focuses a bit more on systems in a way, and how they work within our society, that we have to engage with certain modes of our society, or the individual will essentially suffer. And that becomes a theme towards the end, especially because Andreich's honor and his integrity and his honesty, it appears like they come back to bite him. Because, spoiler alert, Pugachev's rebellion, although it gains a lot of steam and it is very successful in many battles, eventually it fails. And Pugachev and all the conspirators get rounded up. And it's not just the conspirators that are physically with him in the army, but it's other people who may have any connection with Pugachev. And Andreich ends up being one of those people. And while he stayed faithful to the Tsarina, to Catherine, he did, in some sense, he did definitely interact with Pugachev. And he becomes sort of implicated in Pugachev's big conspiracy. Now that's pretty much all of the story that I'm going to say. If you want to read it, I highly recommend it. Pushkin is a phenomenal writer. What a great writer. There's Catherine on the cover right there, if I didn't say that. Pushkin's a phenomenal writer, and I mean to read more of his works. I've read The Queen of Spades and Eugene Onegin. Queen of Spades is also it's a short story, an excellent short story. I'd highly recommend The Queen of Spades, which also engages with the theme of honor and keeping your word. However, in that short story, gambling becomes a bigger sort of element that is honed on. The context, I should say. The context of a gambler. So Pushkin, I highly recommend him as a reader. What a great writer. I plan to reread The Queen of Spades and Eugene Onegin in the future, and a few of his other stories, Peter the Great's Blackamoor, and other stories I plan to read in the near future. This was a translation by Alan Myers, by the way. If you've read this story, The Captain's Daughter, Pushkin in general, let me know what you think about it. How'd you like it? Yeah, even in translation. He's great as a writer. Great writer. And definitely someone who should be read. Definitely, if you want to be well versed in Russian literature. This is like a must read for Russian literature. Anyways, that's the video. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day.